All right, it is 12 o'clock on Wednesday. That means it's time for the Iowa Learning Farms Conservation Webinar Series. And so I'm Matt Helmers with Iowa State University. Uh, Great to be back moderating. Again, 2024, Iowa Learning Farms is celebrating a 20-year anniversary. So we're really excited about that. Be on the lookout for special events that might be happening throughout the year. Um, Really fortunate to, we've had a great lineup of speakers in 2024 so far, and we're continuing that today. We have a colleague, Crystal Liu, that's an associate professor in ecosystems ecology. See if I can say the name of her department. Ecology, or no, yeah,
EEOB, ecology
EEOB,
over
ecology,
evolution.
evolution, and organismal biology. I
And good for
normally
you.
can do it, and I
You
got
made it.
started on the wrong track with it. So, Crystal has been at Iowa State a number of years now, doing some great work on modeling and looking at the impacts of tile drainage on um, nitrate loss from our system. So her talk today is going to be on tile drainage decision tool helps manage ag land and reduce nitrogen pollution. As always, if you have questions, please type those in the chat box and we'll get those to Dr. Liu at the end of her talk. But with that, Crystal, the virtual floor is all yours.
Yeah, thank you, Matt, for the nice introduction, and thanks to the Iowa Learning Farms for inviting me. And yeah, to everyone, thank you for joining this webinar. And I noticed somewhere from the flyer it says we are developing a data-driven decision support tool. So I think yeah, at the beginning I want to make a clarification, and that might be caused by some miscommunication. So actually, the modeling tool we are developing is not a purely data-driven, at least in our definition. So if you want to hear some data-driven perspective, today we use data, but that's not pure data-driven. So I might disappoint you. And so yeah, I will start my presentation. So as an ecosystem ecologist and also as an ecosystem modeler, so I have heard a lot of questions like this. Why do we need a modeling tool to support the decision making, and how to choose a model? So before we decide to invest a certain management practices, we usually want to know how effective it is in terms of protecting the environment or enhancing crop yield. Or we want to know which practices is more cost effective than others, or which one is less affected by these uncertain weather conditions. So, but testing them in the real world would be mission impossible, especially at large scale. But if you have a model, a well-tested model in your computer, that could be more feasible and less expensive. So this model can provide us quantitative assessment and predictions with uncertainty reports. And so what kind of models can serve as a decision support tool? My point of view is that there are a few criteria. First, I think the candidate model should be rigorously tested by using the existing knowledge or the measurement data from the area or the system that is similar to you are managing. And second, the tool should be able to reflect the spatial temporal patterns in the environmental change in the target region. So in other words, if the resolution is too coarse, and you will have a lot of spatial heterogeneity in your region will be averaged or smooth. And third, this tool should be able to discern and quantify the impacts of alternative management practices. And the model we are using called dynamic land ecosystem model, it is a process-based model. So it means we don't rely on empirical methods such as regression or machine learning tools to get modeling estimates. But instead we use thousands of algorithms to mathematically describe the biophysical, biogeochemical, and plant physiological processes under various climate conditions, soil properties, land use, and management practices. So for example, to simulate nitrogen loading from the Mississippi River Basin all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. So we use this model and we divided the study region into thousands of gray cells. And the multiple land cover type can coexist in one gray cell. Then we use this model to estimate how plant will grow each day with available resources such as heat, light, water, and nutrients. And then how much unused nitrogen in the soil after a series of transformation processes can be leached out and transported and delivered along the rivers all the way down to the Gulf. And so there are a number of preparation work before running a model. And we need to develop a series of input data to characterize how the natural environment drivers and human activity could have changed across the study region and over the time. For instance, what I'm showing here are a few examples we prepared for the Mississippi River Basin simulations. And they include the daily climate condition, historical atmospheric composition, and how human use and manage land, water, and nutrient resources. And another important preparation work we need to do before running the model is to tune the key model parameter values and test the model behavior to see if your model can well reproduce the observation pattern, especially for those variables you have a particular interest in. And what I'm showing here is to the left is a near half-century data model comparison for water discharge and nitrogen loading to the Gulf of Mexico at a monthly time step. And to the right, it is a data model comparison about 15-year for river discharge and nitrogen loading to the Gulf of Mexico at daily time step. So the result is pretty encouraging. And we also published a few papers, as I show in the earlier slide, to quantify how heavy rainfall have affected the nitrogen pollution to the Gulf and how they would change under the future climate scenarios. But when it comes to developing a decision support tool, we were wondering whether this model can be directly used in a small catchment in Iowa. Here I put one image around Ames that you must be very familiar with. In our Mississippi River Basin simulation, the spatial resolution is close to 9 kilometer by 9 kilometer. So for single gray cell, it's about 80 square kilometers. But the catchments we want to simulate, like this example I showed here, this is just a few miles north of Ames. Its drainage area is less than 5 square kilometers, which is about 5% of one single gray cell in our Mississippi simulation work. So how reliable our model would be in such a small area? This is the simulation results we first get. I have to say the answer is disappointing. Here, the blue line is the model estimated daily water discharge and daily nitrogen loading from these small catchments, while the red dots are monitoring data in 2015. So you can see the model, the blue line can roughly capture the daily fluctuation and the base flow patterns, but missed most of the peak flow. And there are a couple of days time lag between data and model if you take a closer look. And what's the reason behind that? So if you're familiar with the modeling approach, you may know that there is one kind of uncertainty coming from scaling. So that means with the scale change, some new processes or phenomena will show up or become more important. So we call it scale emergent features. For those models simulating nitrogen loss to water bodies, most of us use measurement data from these two scales, either from plot field level or from watershed level. So to the left, for the plot field level, it involves a lot of local biogeochemical process. Basically, it shows you how the nitrogen transformed from one type to another type and how much can be leached into the water flows. And to the right, for the watershed scale, it not only includes those local nitrogen cycling process, but also it has to consider the hydrological connectivity and the nitrogen transformation during the in-stream process. And so it's really difficult to identify in which process the model results have been biased. But the measurement between these two scales, we call it a delivery scale, is very important for us to identify the model incapability. But the reality is we barely get the data. So this is a sort of like a missing scale at which we don't have data. We don't have the previous model testing to know how model performs at this scale to quantify how much nitrate is there and how they change over time before they enter the streams. So in addition to the scaling issue, there are a few other features that make the Iowa catchments very unique, so that we need to consider bringing some new features or new algorithm in modeling to make sure these features are adequately represented. So if you take an area photo from above for the Des Moines lobe, you will see a bunch of farmed pothole like this. So they're like small ponds in the farmlands. They can retain water in the system and reduce the overland flow. So they make our system like a sponge. But on the other hand, we install many tile pipelines like this to drain the excessive water and reduce the water logging around the crop root area, which makes our system way more leaky than other areas in our country. Last but not least, although the catchment is very small, when we zoom in, we still see large variations in land cover types and management practices across the region and over time. So how do we use a model to mimic water and nitrogen movements in such a landscape that is both spongy and leaky and spatially heterogeneous? So this is the question we need to answer. Supported by the Iowa Neutron Research Center, we selected 4 delivery scale catchments in Iowa. Their size ranges from 2 to 5 square kilometers, and 2 of them in Floyd County and the other 2 in Story County. So they can be viewed as a typical tile-drained agriculture-dominated catchments, and they have a lot of similarity. For example, they have over 80% of land area occupied by row crop planting, and they are geographically close and sharing similar weather conditions, but they also have some contrasting features. For instance, like one pair of them are located in Des Moines lobe, so they have the farmed potholes, but the other 2 don't have. And another thing is in each pair of them, one catchment have cover crop planting since 2017. So their cover crop adoption rate ranges from about 50% to over 80%. So all this similarity and dissimilarity make them a perfect testbed for our model. And to capture what has happened on the land surface, we have developed a 30-meter time series graded data to depict weather condition, catchment characteristics, and management practices. And more importantly, our colleagues, Dr. Bill Crompton and his team have been monitoring the water quality from these 4 catchments for more than 5 years. So we obtained a bunch of precious data set from them, including daily to weekly water discharge and nitrate concentration. So this data serve as wonderful benchmark data for us to test the model performance. And then in this paper, we developed a model called the dilemma catchments. So this is led by by the former PhD student and postdoc in my lab, Pei Cao. He published this paper in Water Research last year. So during this work, we identified some modeling incapability associated with the soil roughness, snow process, farm potholes, and tile drainage. So they are very important to water and nutrient movement dynamics in this area, but have been overlooked or oversimplified in our previous dilemma model. So in this new model versions, I will ask you to look at this diagram of catchment bird view. So each box represents a 30-meter by 30-meter gray cell. So in this new version, the water flow from each gray cell is allowed to move into 8 directions to its neighboring gray cells. And then we also separate water flows into surface runoff, tile flow, and a subsurface flow. And the nitrogen that has been leached from each local pixels will move along each flow with a dynamic flow velocity. And due to different residence time of these flows, nitrate traveling with them have different decay rates. So at the final outlets, we can quantify how much nitrate loading is contributed by each flow each day. And also thanks to Matt Helmers and his team, so we could get the precious in-field management data from our farmers. So this is something very luxury to drive our model in this projects. So later on, we realized such information is super important for us to reproduce the observed daily nitrate concentration dynamics. So those management data include whether we have a cover crop or not, how much nitrogen fertilizer and manure fertilizer have been applied, in which field and when. So all this information tell model at daily time step, what kind of plant is, what kind of a crop is planted here, and how much nitrogen resources we can access. And these are the model estimation from dilemma catchment. The red line represent model simulated results and blue dots for observation. So this is for water discharge. You can see at the daily time step, the model can well reproduce the rise and fall of the peak flows and follow the magnitude of base flow for 4 different catchments and 5 consecutive years. And this one is the data model comparison for inflow nitrate concentration. So precisely predicting nitrate concentration is a huge challenge for all the modeling teams. Because the nitrate concentration involves both chemical and physical process, and the concentration could change a lot even in one single day if there is a rainfall event. So the current existing evaluation criteria for nitrate concentration prediction is at monthly time step. So using here with a time step simulation is over strict for us. But still, these results are statistically satisfactory. As I mentioned earlier, we can estimate how much nitrogen loading comes from different flows each day. So here is an example from one catchment. So what you can see is the tile flow, showing by the blue area, is the dominant contributor to nitrogen delivery, while surface flow, shows by this red color, only plays a small role in peak flow events. So although nitrate concentration in surface runoff could be very low, but if we have a heavy rainfall, the large amount of surface water discharge could make this nitrogen loading from surface relatively high during such events. And another model result I want to show here is the spatial maps. So, our field scientists have seen the nitrogen loading differences between the wet and dry years at the catchment outlets. But what has happened within the catchments and which field is the dominant contributor in one given year remains unknown from the water quality monitoring data. So what we have here is somehow like we open this black box. So you can see nitrogen leaching from each field each year, and a high nitrogen leaching rates indicated by this dark bluish color, and high nitrogen movement flows in this reddish color. And now we have tested the model performance. How can it be used as a decision support tool? So when we do the model simulation, we can set up multiple simulation experiments. So pretty much like you conduct experiments in the field. So once your model is proven okay, making the simulation experiment is way less expensive and quicker than making the experiment in the field. So you can have control and a treatment experiments in your computer for a selected region. For example, I have this line is my best estimate. So I turn on all the input drivers to mimic what has happened during a historical period. And then I set up another simulation with one certain driver turned off. So by comparing these two experiments, we can identify the impacts of this given driver. This is the impact line. Yeah, so by using this newly developed DLAM catchment, here I want to show two examples. So how did we use this model to quantify the impacts of cover crop planting and tile space changes? So for both assessment, we have one common baseline scenario. So in which we use all the historical information we have known about weather condition, land use, and management practices in these four catchments to drive the model during the past 2 decades. And the model estimates have been proven to well reproduce the observation pattern. And then we set up 3 alternative scenarios. In the first alternative scenario, we assume all the cover crop were planted in all the crop fields after the primary row crop are harvested each year. And in the second and third alternative scenarios, we increase and decrease the space between tile lines by 50%, so which represents less tile pipelines and more tile pipelines respectively. Then we compare them with the baseline simulation to estimate how water and nitrate loading would change. And this one is the model estimated impacts of a cover crop planting. So here you can see each dot shows the annual nitrate loading reduction percentage compared with the baseline. And the dot color demonstrate annual precipitation levels. And the middle 2 bars are the 2 catchments that have a partial cover crop adoption historically. So the result we get here only reflect the impacts of a cover crop adoption from partial to full. And for the other 2 catchments, the result we show here represent the cover crop reduction, nitrate reduction potential from cover crop due to 0 to full adoptions. So you can see they have large interannual variations and cross-catchment variation. So overall, we found the larger nitrate reduction potentials in those wet years, represented by the bluish dots. And this is possibly because in wet years, cover crop helps more in retaining nitrogen, which otherwise may be leached into the water flow. However, the variation of corn planting area shown by the circle size have little impact on nitrogen loading reduction. And now let's take a look at the model predicted impacts of a tile space change. So likewise, the dots represent the annual change percentage in two alternative scenarios compared with the baseline. So the green box shows the water and nitrogen loading changes with the last pipeline. And the yellow box represents more tile pipelines. So generally speaking, more tile pipelines are likely to cause more water discharge and a higher nitrogen loading. So here you can see the zero line. So if they above the zero line, that means increased water discharge and increased nitrogen loading. But one thing I have to mention here is they have huge interannual variations and cross-catchment variations. And another thing we have found is the water and the nitrogen movements in RS and KS, the left two catchments, are less affected by the tile space changes. So that may be caused by two reasons. One is the RS and KS have only half of the land area is tile drained, while the other two catchments have nearly 90% of the land area tile drained. And second, the RS and KS have the depressional storage that could help provide extra water retention capability. And so large proportion of this water retention will gradually enter tile drainage. So we think the tile capacity may matter less in these two catchments. So to summarize, we still have a long way to go. So today, what I'm showing are just an example and our attempts to develop such a tool in 4 small catchments. And we think the process-based modeling could be a promising, scalable decision support tools, but it needs rigorous model testing and evaluations. And we also see a potential achievement through long-term close collaboration between field scientists, modelers, and decision makers to develop more accurate quantitative assessments to support our decision making. And the last thing I want to remind is we need to be aware of and acknowledge there are huge variations in the consequence of alternative management practices over the space and time. So when we make the decision, when we use the decision tool, we need to consider the variation and the difference among your target areas. So last, I want to thank my team members, collaborators, and the funding agency, including Iowa Nutrient Research Center, National Science Foundation. And in this work, we use a series of data from different sources, including farmer survey and time series input to drive our model, and in-field monitoring data to validate the model. So we received tremendous help from our collaborators like Dr. Bill Crompton, David Green, Greg Stenbeck, and Matt Helmers and their team. So if you have any further interest, you want to discuss more, and feel free to reach out to me through this email. And I'm happy to answer any question here.
All right, thanks, Crystal. Yeah, feel free to get in your questions. We have some that have come in, but all right. Quickly, maybe we'll go through those last couple slides here on the if you need a CCA credit. Okay, if you watch this webinar live and need or want a CCA CEU, please email Elena Whitaker, ALENAW at iastate.edu by 5 o'clock today. So again, ALENAW at iastate.edu with your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number. Let's go to the next slide, Crystal. If you watch this webinar live and are willing to fill out a voluntary demographic survey, we would greatly appreciate it. You can scan that QR code or go to iowalearningfarms.org/survey. Only one response is needed per year. So if you filled one out for a 2024 webinar, thank you very much. If you haven't for one of the 2024 webinars and are willing to do so, we would greatly appreciate it. Again, you can scan that QR code or go to iowalearningfarms.org/survey. And then let's go to the last slide just to put a plug in. Colleague from University of Kentucky, Dr. Amanda Gumbert, talking about engaging farmers in conservation leadership. Saw somebody had their hand raised. If they could perhaps type their question in the chat box, that would be great. There was a question comment here, I think, on your tile spacing, wondering if that should be meters and not centimeters for the like 10 or 20 or 30 meter spacing for the drains. I think on that slide for the alternative.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Okay. Should be I think 10, 20 or 30 meters there.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. Does your model kind of predict how much nitrogen uptake there is by the cover crops when they're grown?
Yes, we simulate nitrogen uptake by the cover crop. So basically for such a process-based model, we have to simulate the nitrogen cycling not only in soil and water, we also need to know how much of them have been taken up by plant growth. Okay. So that's why you see like year by year, if we have a different weather conditions, if your cover crop grow differently, we also see the fluctuation of crop nitrogen uptake.
Yeah, okay. How does the model handle winter snowpack and its impact on spring tile flow?
Yeah, this is a very good question. We have spent nearly 1 year to tackle this question. And originally we have a simple snow process, but later on we realized this affect the spring, especially at the spring snow melting period. This process is very sensitive, and for the base flow and early spring thaw. So now in this process we have a 2-layer snow pack. So we simulate the snow sublation and melting and vertical transports. And so there's involves a number of complicated algorithm. So if you have more interest, we have in our published paper, we have a detailed description about that.
Yeah, Crystal gave a 25-minute presentation that there was a lot of model development as part of this to be able to use this model at this scale. I think it's going to be fabulous for future endeavors, which brings me to my question here is kind of what might be some other scenarios you might look at. So you've looked a little bit at cover crops and impact of tile drainage. It seems like we could look at some other potential scenarios there. There was a question, is the paper out, Crystal?
Yeah, the modeling paper is out.
Okay.
But for the practice potential, we didn't publish anything yet. So it's
okay. I'll see if I can find the model paper and put a link to that. There was somebody asked if we could share it or provide a link. So okay, but what might be some of the future scenarios you look at?
Yeah, this is the question I also ask myself. So in the long run, I think we definitely want to see more management practices and to identify or to generate a quantitative assessment, like which practices is more effective. In my rough thinking, they must be very different. And so considering those in-field and agile field practices, such as changing the fertilizer application timing and changing the ratio between chemical fertilizer and manure, as well as have maybe different, more diversified cropping choices. And we include more, like in more years, include those nitrogen fixing crop varieties. And also for the agile field practices, we also want to see this model. At the current stage, we do not have the capability to do like the saturated riparian buffer. But since we have much confidence in the tile drained water flow and nitrate concentration, so that might be our next step to quantify how much nitrogen can be reduced through the saturated riparian buffer.
And put the link to that paper in there. Huge thanks to Ellen Albright, who beat me to it. So thanks a lot, Ellen, for that. Just a shout out for quickly finding that. You are quicker than I am. So there's another question here. Is there a crop growth model included to estimate, the end uptake, I guess, in soil end release and nitrification of nutrient or nitrogen sources?
Is there a crop growth model?
Yep. So I guess this.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
As I said, the model we are using is a land ecosystem model. So within each grid cell, there might be multiple land cover types. So we may have, if you have a very diversified land cover types, so in one single grid cells, you may have grassland and different type of crops. And then we need to simulate those crop growth process, including the photosynthesis and respiration. So basically, you need to know how much carbon can be assimilated, and during that process, how much biomass can be produced, and how much nitrogen need to take up to support such carbon assimilation and allocation to different plant organs. So yeah, this is a complicated process.
Yeah, and it includes it would also include soil nitrogen cycling within that grid cell, right?
Yes, yes. Because
okay.
We have litter-fall. So if you need in your model, you need to simulate the litter-fall and the soil organic matter decomposition process, and the nitrogen has to be considered through this biogeochemical process.
Okay. Good question here, and this individual asking, one of your last slides, you mentioned potholes. Were there any model improvements or developments related to pothole mechanisms?
Yeah, this is one important thing we enhanced and included into this new model. So because we want to have a better water flow. So when you look at those small scale monitoring data, without this pothole, the water flow might be too much because there is no such small pond to hold water. So in our modeling structure, we have to include this new feature and considering the transport process and also the nitrogen travel from the tile line underneath that or nearby the pothole. So in our paper, we also quantify how this pothole mechanism could affect the modeling assessments. So we compare the two cases by using same model with and without pothole. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting findings.
All right, I think those are the questions. And Crystal, thank you very much. I'll put a plug in for also people to go to your website and look. You also have some information there that you and some former graduate students have put together trying to estimate nitrogen inputs. So a GIS database there trying to make a best estimate of distribution of that. Might be something else if there are any modelers on here that they're priority familiar, but just in case they aren't, you have some information there. So
Yeah, thank you.
thank you very much for your work. Again, if you need CCA CEU, email Elena Whitaker, ALENAW at iastate.edu by 5 o'clock today. If you're there, you go with your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number. And then if you're willing to fill out the voluntary demographic survey, that would be great. iowalearningfarms.org/survey. And last but not least, please tune in next week for Amanda Gumbert from the University of Kentucky. So we're gonna move out of Iowa for a talk next week. So please join us then. With that, thank you very much for attending, and again, thank you, Crystal, for your presentation and very interesting and important work. So
Yeah, thank you everyone. Yeah.